There was a man who ruled the known world, and some nights he could not make himself care about any of it. He had armies, he had scribes, he had a palace with more rooms than he ever walked into. And still, in the dark, before sleep came, he picked up a pen that wasn't for anyone but himself, and he wrote down the same quiet question in 100 different shapes. How do I keep going when going feels like nothing? He never published the answer. He never meant for us to read it. But we did. And tonight, so will you. Not as a student, not as a follower of some ancient discipline, but as someone who is simply, quietly, tired. Stay a while. This is not a lecture. This is a clearing in the woods, and the fire is already lit. Before anything else, before Rome, before the war camps, before the old man with tired eyes, I want you to do something very small. Notice the weight of your shoulders right now. Not to fix them, not to sit up straighter, or perform good posture for some invisible teacher. Just notice, are they near your ears? Are they dropped, heavy, sunk into the chair, or the bed, or the floor beneath you? There is no wrong answer. There is only the noticing. Notice the temperature of the room you're in. Is there a draft somewhere? Near a window? Under a door? Is the air still? Can you feel it against the skin of your hands, your face, the back of your neck? You don't have to change anything. You are not here to fix the room. You are here to land in it. Notice the sounds furthest from you. A hum from another room. Wind, if there is wind. The particular silence of a house at night, which is never really silence. It's just quiet enough that you can finally hear the parts of it that were always there. This is not a meditation app. I'm not going to ask you to visualize a beach you've never been to, or breathe in a way that feels like homework. I only want you here, in this body, in this room, in this exact unremarkable moment. Because for a while now, you may not have been. You may have been somewhere else, in the version of tomorrow, where the difficult conversations happens, in the replay of yesterday, where you said the wrong thing, or nothing at all, in the long gray corridor of should, the things you should be doing right now instead of resting, instead of sitting here, instead of letting your shoulders be heavy. That corridor is a kind of exile, and you've been living in it longer than you meant to. So before we speak of an old emperor and his private notebook, before we speak of Rome or ruins or philosophy at all, I want to offer you this. For the next while, there is nowhere else you are supposed to be. Not because the rest of your life has stopped needing you. It hasn't. But because for this one small clearing of time, you are allowed to just be a body, in a room, breathing. Feel your feet, if they're on the ground. Feel the fabric against your back. If your eyes are heavy, let them be heavy. If your jaw is tight, you don't have to release it. Just notice that it's tight, the way you'd notice rain on a window. Something to observe, not something to solve. You aren't here to learn tonight. Not really. Learning implies a test at the end, a grade, a measure of whether you did it right. There is no test here. You are here to land. The way a bird lands on a branch. It's flown past 100 times, not because the branch is new, but because the wings are tired, and the branch is still there, waiting, the way it always was. Let yourself land. We'll get to Marcus Aurelius. We'll get to the war camp on the frozen river, the plague that swept through his city, the sons he buried, the wife he loved and lost, and the strange, aching honesty of the notebook he never meant to publish. All of that is coming. But first, just this. You, here, now, breathing. That's the whole beginning. That's enough. Now I want to talk about the thing that brought you here tonight, Even if you didn't say it out loud, even if you told yourself you just wanted some background video to fall asleep to. There's a particular kind of tired that doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from feeling too much, for too long, without anywhere for the feeling to go. It's not the tiredness of a hard day's labor, which at least has the decency to end when the sun goes down. It's quieter than that. It sits underneath everything, under the laughing at dinner, under the replying to messages, under the getting up and getting dressed and getting through, like a low hum you've stopped noticing because it never stops. If you've felt that, I want to say something to you plainly before we go any further. There is nothing wrong with you. I know how that sounds. I know it might slide right past you, the way kind words sometimes do, when you're not in a place to receive them. So let me say it differently, in a way that might land instead of slide. Think of soil in winter. Nothing is growing, nothing is blooming. If you didn't know better, you might walk past a winter field and think it was dead, barren, wasted, a failure of a field. But it isn't dead, it's resting. Underneath that still gray surface, the soil is doing invisible work, holding nutrients, protecting roots from frost, preparing, in its own slow, wordless way, for a spring it cannot yet see, and does not need to believe in yet. The stillness isn't the absence of life. The stillness is the life, just turned inward, just turned quiet. Your numbness might be the same kind of winter, not a broken part of you, not a moral failing, not a character flaw, not evidence that you are somehow doing your one life wrong. A protective wall your own soul built, brick by careful brick, because at some point, maybe recently, maybe years ago, maybe so long ago you don't remember building it, the world got too loud, too demanding, too much, and something in you, wiser than your conscious mind, said, enough. We are closing this door for a while to keep the house from flooding. That is not weakness. That is a kind of intelligence older than language. Your body has circuit breakers, the same way a house does. When the current running through a system is more than the wiring can safely hold, the breaker doesn't ask permission. It simply trips. It shuts the power off before the whole house burns down. It isn't malfunctioning when it does that. It is doing exactly, precisely, what it was built to do. Your apathy, your flatness, the way certain things that used to move you now barely register, that may be your breaker. Not proof that something in you is defective, proof that something in you is protective. We live in a world that rarely offers this framing. Mostly we are told, quietly, in 1,000 small ways, through the pace everyone else seems to keep, through the language of hustling and grinding and optimizing every hour, that if we are not producing, not achieving, not visibly moving forward, then something has gone wrong with us. That rest must be earned, that stillness must be justified, that a soul is only as good as its output. I want to gently set that idea down, right here, on the floor between us, and leave it there. You don't have to carry it into the rest of this video, because here is what's true, and what the old philosophers we're about to meet understood long before modern language gave us words like burnout or shutdown. A human being is not a machine that malfunctions when it slows down. A human being is closer to a tide. Tides ebb. They don't apologize for ebbing. They don't feel ashamed that they aren't cresting every hour of the day. The ebb is not the failure of the tide. The ebb is half of what a tide is. Without it, there is no rhythm at all. Just a flood that never recedes, wearing away at the shore until there's nothing left to hold the water's shape. You have been cresting for a long time, maybe, meeting the demands, showing up, holding the roles you hold, parent, employee, friend, the person everyone else leans on. And now the tide in you has pulled back, and some part of you is standing on the shore, looking at the wet sand where the water used to be, wondering if it's ever coming back, wondering if this is what's left of you now. It is coming back, but maybe not on the schedule you'd choose. And maybe this is the part worth sitting with. Maybe it doesn't need to come back yet for you to be worthy of gentleness tonight. You don't have to solve your numbness to deserve rest from it. You don't have to explain your ebb to earn permission to simply be in it. The soil doesn't have to defend its stillness to the farmer. It is simply, quietly, doing what winter soil does. You are allowed to do the same. This is what I mean when I say, tonight is not about fixing you. You are not a broken machine waiting for a repair. You are a person in a season, and there is an old man, gone now for nearly 2,000 years, who understood this kind of season better than almost anyone who ever wrote it down, because he lived inside it for most of his adult life, and he never once let anyone tell him it made him less. His name was Marcus Aurelius, and what he wrote, in the dark, for no one but himself, might be the gentlest, most honest companion you could ask for right now. Let's meet him. Before we go further, let's pause here for a moment. Not to rest from effort, we haven't asked much of you yet, but to rest from thinking, which is its own kind of labor, even when it's gentle. Picture, if you'd like, a river, not a wild one, a slow one, the kind that moves through low hills in late afternoon light, unhurried, the way water moves when it isn't being asked to prove anything. On the surface of that river, small boats drift, paper boats maybe, or leaves, or nothing at all. Just the idea of small vessels carrying small things. Every thought you've had today that doesn't need solving right now, you can set onto one of those boats. The stray worry about tomorrow, the comment you're still turning over from earlier, the long list of things undone. Set it gently onto a boat and let it go. You don't have to push the boats. The current does that. Your only job, if you can call it a job, is to stand on the bank and let them pass. We will leave those thoughts on the riverbank now. Let them float away, unhurried, the way the afternoon light moves across slow water. You are the bank, not the water. You are the still, solid ground the river moves past, not the current itself, pulled along by every passing thing. Stand there a moment. Watch the boats go. Good. Let them keep drifting, even as we begin to speak again. You don't have to hold on to anything right now, not even this video, not even this voice. Just the weight of your shoulders, the temperature of the room, and the slow, unhurried water, carrying what doesn't need to be carried by you tonight. Now, gently, let's turn toward Rome. Picture a tent, not a grand one, a soldier's tent, canvas walls thin against a wind that comes down off a frozen river, somewhere at the edge of the known world. It's cold enough that breath fogs in the lamplight. Outside, an army is camped along a border that keeps threatening to collapse, the way borders do when an empire has grown too large for any one man to hold together. Inside the tent, an old man sits alone. He is not young anymore. His back aches in the mornings, his eyes strain against the lamplight, and he has buried more people he loved than most of us will bury in a lifetime, twice as long. He is, at this point, one of the most powerful human beings alive. Emperor of Rome, commander of legions, a man whose single word could move armies, end lives, redraw the edges of nations, and in the quiet of that tent, at the end of a day, spent making decisions that will outlive him by centuries, he takes out a small notebook, and he writes, not a decree, not a letter, not anything meant for another living soul, a private, aching reminder to himself. Get up. You have work to do. The work of being human. Why complain, as if that were some great burden? He wasn't writing a philosophy book. He didn't know and never would know that we would one day call these pages meditations and study them in universities, print them in leather-bound editions, quote them in offices and gyms and grief support groups, 2,000 years after his death. He was writing to survive his own Tuesday. He was writing because some nights, even an emperor cannot make himself care about anything, and the only cure he had found, the only one that worked, over and over, across decades of war and loss and grinding administrative duty, was to sit down in the lamplight and talk himself, gently, back into his own life. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it matters more than it might seem to at first. We tend to imagine the great figures of history as people who simply had what we lack. Marcus Aurelius, we assume, must have possessed some deep, unshakable reservoir of resolve that we, in our exhaustion, simply don't have access to. He was an emperor, after all. Surely emperors don't feel the flat gray, nothing that presses down on an ordinary person at 11 at night, staring at a ceiling, wondering what any of it is for. But that isn't what the notebook shows us. The notebook shows us a man who had to remind himself, again and again, in 100 different phrasings across a decade of private writing, why it was worth continuing. A man who wrote to himself about waking up reluctant, about the pull toward staying under the blankets, about the specific ache of a mind that has grown tired of its own routines. A man who, near the very end of his life, still needed to write down, as if it were not yet settled, fact, you are allowed to be here. Keep going. This is the secret at the center of meditations that most summaries skip past. It isn't a book of triumphant wisdom handed down from a man who had already solved the problem of despair. It's the opposite. It's a record of someone in it, in the tent, in the cold, in the grief, in the low hum of quiet exhaustion, writing his way through, one entry at a time, never fully arriving, never done needing the reminder. He didn't write for an audience. That's worth repeating slowly. He wrote to remind himself that he was worth more than what he produced in a day. Not because he doubted his worth as an emperor. His worth as emperor was never in question. Not to Rome, not to history. He doubted his worth as a person, underneath all that armor of title and duty. He needed, some nights, to remind the man inside the armor that he mattered regardless of the armor at all. If you've ever felt that, the sense that you are only as good as what you accomplished today, that your worth quietly recalculates itself each evening based on some invisible ledger of tasks completed and messages answered and rooms held together, then you already understand Marcus Aurelius better than most classroom philosophy could ever teach you. You understand him not through study, but through recognition. He felt what you feel. He just happened to feel it while wearing the purple robes of an empire, which turns out to change very little about how heavy a tired heart actually is. Let me tell you a little about the life that produced those pages, because the context makes the honesty of them almost unbearable in the best way. Marcus was not born expecting to rule. He was raised in a wealthy Roman family, adopted as a young man into the line of succession, almost by accident of politics, groomed from adolescence by tutors, in rhetoric, law, and, most importantly for our purposes tonight, Stoic philosophy. One of those tutors, a stern and demanding man named Junius Rusticus, introduced him to the private writings of a former slave-turned-philosopher, Epictetus, whose teachings would shape the entire architecture of Marcus's inner life. It's a strange, quiet detail of history, that one of the most powerful men who ever lived found his deepest comfort in the words of a man born with nothing, who had once been beaten, who had once been owned. Marcus became emperor in the year 161, ruling jointly at first with his adopted brother Lucius Verus, and almost immediately the reign that history remembers as one of relative peace and prosperity for Rome became, for Marcus personally, an unbroken stretch of loss. A war broke out on the eastern frontier. Roman soldiers returning from that war brought back with them something far worse than defeat, a plague, likely smallpox, that would come to be known as the Antonine Plague. It swept through the empire for over a decade, killing by some estimates several million people, including, eventually, Marcus's own co-emperor and brother. Historians still argue about the exact numbers, but the felt experience, recorded in fragments from the time, is unmistakable. Cities emptying, the smell of burning bodies drifting over Rome for months, a whole civilization living under the low, constant hum of grief that never quite lifted. And into that plague-stricken world, Marcus kept having children and kept burying them. He and his wife, Faustina, had at least 13 children together across their marriage. Only a handful survived to adulthood. Historians differ on the exact count, but by any reading of the record, Marcus Aurelius spent much of his life as a father who had buried more children than most parents in history will ever have to imagine bearing at all. I tell you this not to make the video heavier than it needs to be, but because I think it matters deeply that the man whose private notebook has comforted so many people through their own quiet despair was not writing from a place of theoretical calm. He was writing from inside a life that would have justified almost any amount of bitterness, any amount of numbness, any amount of simply giving up on the project of caring. And yet, this is the turn, this is the aha worth sitting with. He didn't give up, not because he found some trick that made the grief stop hurting. He didn't. The notebook is full of entries where the ache is still raw, still present, still unresolved. He kept going because he built, slowly, entry by entry, a way of relating to his own pain that didn't require the pain to disappear first. That's the gift he left behind, whether he meant to or not an escape from despair, a way of walking beside it without it deciding everything. There's a phrase that shows up in various forms throughout the notebook Marcus kept. The idea of an inner citadel, a fortress at the center of a person that no outside force, no grief, no plague, no betrayal can fully breach, provided the person tending it knows where the walls actually are. I want to be careful here because this idea gets misused constantly in the modern world, twisted into something colder than Marcus ever intended. It gets turned into a kind of armor-plated stoicism, capital S, the popular kind, the kind that tells you to suppress what you feel, to never let anyone see you struggle, to treat emotion itself as a weakness to be managed away. That is not what the inner citadel means, and it's worth untangling the difference carefully, because I think the real version is far gentler and far more useful to you tonight than the version culture has flattened it into. Marcus's inner citadel was never about not feeling. He felt enormously. The notebook is soaked in grief, in frustration, in moments of real anger at his own shortcomings, in something close to despair about the state of the world around him. The citadel wasn't a wall against feeling. It was a wall around the one thing he decided he would not hand over to circumstance. The part of him that got to decide what his own life meant, regardless of what happened to him. Here's the distinction, and I think it's the single most important idea in this whole video, so let's slow down for it. There are two categories of things in any human life. There are the things that happen to us, the plague, the dead children, the wars on the frontier, the exhausting demands of a job we didn't fully choose, the way other people treat us, the weather, the traffic, the diagnosis, the layoff, the friend who stopped calling. And then there is the much smaller, much quieter category, the way we relate to what happens to us, the meaning we assign it, the story we tell ourselves about who we are inside of it. Marcus, following the philosophy handed to him by that formerly enslaved teacher Epictetus, believed with something close to religious conviction that almost everything in the first category was outside of a person's control, and that trying to control it anyway, trying to will the plague away, trying to will grief into obedience, trying to force the world into cooperating with our preferences, was the single greatest source of unnecessary suffering a human being could inflict on themselves. But the second category, the relating, the meaning, the inner posture we take toward what happens, that he believed was always, entirely, unshakably ours. No emperor, no enemy, no plague, no grief could reach in and take that from him unless he handed it over willingly. This is not the same as saying, just think positive, or choose happiness. I want to be very clear about that, because that cheerful, forceful cousin of the idea has done a lot of harm to people who are genuinely struggling by implying that their pain is a failure of willpower. That isn't Marcus's teaching at all. He isn't asking you to feel good about what's happening. He's offering something much quieter and much kinder. The reminder that even in the depths of something you cannot control, cannot fix, cannot make go away, there remains one small, sovereign room inside you that circumstance cannot enter without your permission. Not a room where you pretend not to be sad, a room where you decide, even while sad, even while numb, even while exhausted, that you still belong to yourself. Think about what that might have meant for a man who had already lost so much by the time he wrote it. He couldn't bring his children back. He couldn't end the plague by decree, though God knows the power of his office might have tempted a lesser man into believing he should be able to. He couldn't have controlled the border wars, the endless administrative grind, the slow erosion of an empire too large to hold together by will alone. Almost everything that mattered to him, in the largest sense, was outside his control. And yet, night after night, in that tent, in that lamplight, he kept returning to the one thing that wasn't, the shape of his own inner life. Whether he would meet tomorrow with decency or bitterness, whether he would let the loss make him cruel, or let it, somehow, make him softer instead, whether he would keep showing up for the small, unglamorous work of being a good man, not a great emperor, not a legendary conqueror, just a good man, even when nothing around him seemed to be rewarding that choice. That is the inner citadel, not a fortress that keeps feeling out, a fortress that keeps you in, keeps the part of you that decides who you are safe from being conscripted by circumstances that were never going to ask your permission anyway. I think this matters enormously for the particular kind of tired you might be carrying tonight, because so much of quiet despair comes from a feeling of total powerlessness, the sense that everything is happening to you, that you are simply being carried along by a current of obligations and disappointments, and slow accumulating exhaustion that you never agreed to and cannot seem to escape. And that feeling is often, in the outer sense, entirely accurate. You may not be able to change your circumstances tonight. You may not be able to fix the job, the relationship, the grief, the diagnosis, the years that feel like they slipped past without your consent. But there is still a room, small, quiet, often forgotten under the weight of everything else, but still there, still yours, still untouched by any of it, unless you decide to hand it over. The room where you get to decide, even now, even like this, that you are still a person of decency, that you still get to choose gentleness toward yourself, even when the world outside offered none, that your worth was never actually up for negotiation by your circumstances in the first place. It just felt that way, because the noise outside the room got so loud, you forgot the room was there. Marcus never stopped needing to find his way back to that room. That's the most comforting part of the whole story, I think. He wasn't a man who discovered the Inner Citadel once, and then lived there permanently, serene and untouchable for the rest of his days. He had to keep finding the door again, night after night, entry after entry, for years. The notebook isn't proof that he mastered this. It's proof that he kept returning to the practice of it, long after any reasonable person might have assumed he'd already learned the lesson. That's not weakness. That's what the practice actually looks like, for anyone, in any era. You don't find the room once and never lose the door again. You find it, you lose it, the noise creeps back in, and then, gently, without judgment, the way Marcus modeled for us across a decade of private pages, you find your way back. Tonight, if you've lost the door for a while, that doesn't mean you failed at something. It means you're human, walking the same worn path an emperor walked nearly 2,000 years ago in a cold tent at the edge of an empire, missing people he loved, and still, finding his way back to the one room that was always, unshakably his. Let's pause again, just for a moment. Whatever we've just spoken of, the grief, the empire, the small sovereign room, you can set it down now, the way you'd set down a heavy coat once you've reached the fire. Picture this time a view from very high up, not frightening high, gentle high, the height of a hill on the edge of a small town, looking down at rooftops and rivers and roads that from this distance look more like veins in a leaf than the tangled, urgent streets you walk every day. From here, you can see the whole shape of the town at once, the way the river bends around the old mill, the way the roads all eventually lead back toward each other, the way even the busiest street from this height is just a thin, quiet line. Everything that felt enormous down there, the argument, the deadline, the ache in your chest, is still real. Nothing about it has become less true. But from up here, it takes its place among all the other small true things. The birds crossing the valley, the slow drift of clouds, the particular gold of late light on a rooftop. You don't have to stay up here. This isn't about floating away from your life. It's just a reminder, held for a few breaths, that your life is larger than whatever is loudest in it tonight. There is a whole valley around the one street you've been standing on. Breathe here a moment. Good. Let's come back down slowly, carrying that height with us, not as an escape, but as a kind of pocket-sized perspective you can return to whenever the noise gets too close again. There's a particular exercise Marcus returns to again and again in his private notebook. Modern readers and scholars often call it the view from above, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Though he arrived at it centuries before anyone had photographed the Earth from orbit, before anyone had the visual language we now take for granted of a small blue planet suspended in vast, dark quiet, he would imagine himself rising, not literally, but in the mind's eye, up above the palace, above Rome, above the whole Italian peninsula, up until the war camps and the plague-stricken streets, and the private grief of his own household shrank to the size of a single point of light among countless other points of light scattered across a vast, indifferent, achingly beautiful darkness. From up there, he'd remind himself, the borders his armies fought and died over become invisible. The disputes that consumed entire seasons of his political life become too small to see at all. Even the greatest empires, viewed from that height, are the faintest flicker against the scale of everything else that exists. It would be easy to hear this and think it's a bleak idea, a way of saying nothing matters, so why bother caring? But that's not where Marcus lands it, and I think the actual destination of the exercise is far more tender than that. He doesn't use the vastness to make himself feel small in a diminishing way. He uses it to make himself feel light. There's a difference. Feeling small in a diminishing way says, you are insignificant, so your pain doesn't matter, so stop making a fuss. That's cruelty, dressed up as perspective. What Marcus is reaching for is something gentler. You are part of something so much larger than the one loud problem in front of you tonight, that you are allowed to set it down for a moment and simply belong to the larger, quieter whole. It's the difference between a person telling you your grief is nothing and a person sitting beside you at the edge of the ocean, saying nothing at all, just letting the size of the water hold some of the weight you've been carrying alone. I think this matters enormously, for quiet despair specifically, because one of the cruelest features of that particular kind of tired is how airless it feels. Everything closes in. The room gets smaller. The same three worries circle the same tight loop, over and over, until there's no space left to breathe inside your own thoughts. The view from above isn't a denial of the worries. It's a window cracked open in a room that's gotten too small to hold you. Try it now, gently if you'd like. Not as a task to perform correctly, just as an offering. Picture yourself exactly as you are in exactly the room you're in. Now, imagine the walls of that room becoming transparent, then dissolving, and you can see the street outside, the neighborhood, the town or city, holding thousands of other rooms just like yours, each one holding someone else's version of tonight, someone else's grief, someone else's small triumph, someone else's ordinary evening. Let the view keep widening. The city becomes a cluster of light on a dark curved horizon. The country becomes a shape you'd recognize from a map, its borders invisible from this height, the way Marcus once imagined his own empire's borders vanishing. The whole planet becomes a single, softly glowing sphere, turning slowly in a silence so complete it isn't lonely. It's just vast and old, and entirely unconcerned with rushing anyone through anything. And somewhere on that sphere, in one small room, among billions of other small rooms, is you, still there, still breathing, still exactly as real and as worthy of gentleness as you were before we widened the view. Nothing about your worth has shrunk. What's shrunk, just for a moment, is the illusion that the one loud problem in front of you is the entire size of the universe. Marcus used this practice not to escape his responsibilities. He'd close the notebook and go back to ruling an empire the next morning, the same as ever. He used it to re-enter his responsibilities with something looser in his chest, a little more room to breathe inside the same demanding life. That's the whole purpose, not escape. Roominess. You don't have to solve anything from up here. You don't have to figure out your entire life from this height. You just get to remember, for a few quiet breaths, that you are one small, real, tender point of light among an unimaginable number of others, and that this has always been true, even on the nights when the walls of the one small room felt like the whole of existence. Let's come back down. Now, slowly, the way Marcus always did, carrying the height with him, back into the tent, back into the cold, back into the work of being human for one more day. There's a line from Marcus's notebook that has traveled further than almost anything else he wrote, quoted now on posters, in books, in 1,000 corners of the internet, often stripped of the context that makes it actually mean something. In his own words, roughly rendered, he reminds himself that whatever stands in the way of an action can itself become the way forward, that the obstacle to a task can become the task. Stripped of context, this can sound like another exhausting call to relentless forward motion, the kind of message that quietly implies you should be grateful for every hardship, should be finding the silver lining in real pain, should be turning every closed door into some inspiring metaphor before you've even had time to grieve that the door closed at all. I don't think that's what he meant, and I don't think that's what I want to offer you tonight either. So let's slow down and find the gentler, truer shape of the idea underneath the quote. Marcus wrote this particular entry, most historians believe, while dealing with the daily, grinding frustrations of running an empire during wartime, supply lines that failed, advisors who disagreed, plans that had to be abandoned the moment circumstances shifted. He wasn't talking about grief. He wasn't talking about the death of a child or the ache of missing someone who isn't coming back. He was talking about something much smaller and much more universal, the experience of wanting to do one thing and finding the world unwilling to cooperate. And what he noticed, what he kept rediscovering entry after entry, is that a mind fixated on the original plan often suffers twice, once from the obstacle itself, and a second time from the mind's own resistance to the obstacle being there at all. The bridge is out. That's the first difficulty. But then there's a second self-inflicted difficulty, the endless internal arguing with reality that this shouldn't be happening. This isn't fair. If only the bridge were still there. A conversation with a version of the world that doesn't exist, instead of a conversation with the world that does. His practice, and I want to be careful to call it a practice, not a cure, because it never fully removed the frustration, it just gave him somewhere to put it, was to ask, as soon as he noticed himself resisting what had already happened, given that this is now the situation, what is the next decent, useful thing available to me? Not, how do I force the original plan back into existence? Not, whose fault is this, and how much energy should I spend being angry about it? Just, given the bridge is out, is there a ford further downstream? Given the bridge is out, is there a boat? Given the bridge is out, what's actually available to me, right here, in the world, as it currently, stubbornly, actually is? This is not the same as saying, every obstacle is secretly a gift, or that everything happens for a reason, or any of the other phrases that can feel like a slap to someone in real pain. Marcus never claimed the plague was a gift. He never claimed his children's deaths were secretly for the best. That would have been an insult to the size of what he'd lost, and he was too honest a writer in that private notebook, meant for no one's eyes but his own, to ever pretend otherwise. What he's offering is smaller, and I think more useful, precisely because it doesn't require you to make peace with the unfairness of what happened before you're ready to. It only asks, once the thing has happened, the loss, the closed door, the diagnosis, the ended relationship, the missed opportunity, where is the smallest available next step of decency, for yourself or for someone else, that's still within reach. Sometimes that next step is tiny. Getting out of bed, drinking water, answering one message instead of the whole inbox. Marcus, on his hardest days, wasn't asking himself to conquer anything grand. He was asking himself to find the next small, human, decent thing available inside a day that had already gone sideways. I want to offer this to you gently, because if you're carrying quiet despair right now, you may have a long list of obstacles that never asked your permission before showing up. Grief, exhaustion, circumstances that genuinely aren't fair, situations you didn't choose and can't simply think your way out of. I'm not going to tell you those obstacles are secretly gifts. I don't believe that, and I don't think Marcus believed it either, not in the shallow way it's often repeated now. But I will offer you his quieter question, the one underneath the famous line. Not why is this obstacle here, and not how do I force it to become something inspiring. Just gently, given that this is where I am tonight, is there one small, decent thing still within reach? Maybe the answer tonight is nothing more than rest. Maybe the smallest available decent thing is simply allowing yourself to stop fighting the fact that today was hard and letting that be enough of an answer for now. That counts. Marcus, in his own notebook, gave himself permission for exactly that, more than once. Entries that are nothing more than a tired man, reminding himself that enough had been asked of him for one day, and that stopping was not the same as failing. The obstacle becoming the way doesn't mean every obstacle transforms into triumph. Sometimes the way forward is simply, rest here a while. That is still forward. That is still the path. It just doesn't look like the version of forward the loud parts of the world usually reward. There's a word that appears throughout Stoic writing, one the Greeks used before Marcus's time, and that he inherited along with the rest of the philosophy, Sympathia. It doesn't translate cleanly into English, but the rough shape of it is something like a felt sense that everything in existence is woven together, connected by threads too fine to see with the ordinary eye, so that no single part can truly be understood as separate from the whole. Marcus returns to this idea often, especially in his later writing, and I think it's one of the most tender threads running through the entire notebook, even though it rarely gets the attention that lines like, "The obstacle is the way," receive. Where the Citadel is about protecting your inner sovereignty, Sympathia is almost its mirror image, a reminder that you are never as alone or as separate as despair likes to convince you that you are. Quiet despair has a particular cruelty to it. It isolates. It convinces you, slowly and without ever quite announcing itself, that your tiredness is a private failing, that everyone else out there is managing just fine, that you've somehow fallen out of step with a world that's still moving smoothly without you. It makes the walls of the one small room feel not just small, but sealed, as though no one else has ever stood in a room quite like this one. Marcus, writing in that cold tent, surrounded by an army, ruling an empire of tens of millions of people, still found himself returning to this idea of the woven thread, the sense that his own suffering connected him to every other person who had ever suffered, rather than separating him from them. He wrote about the interconnectedness of all things the way a person returns to a favorite worn blanket, not because it solved anything, but because it warmed something that grief had left cold. I want to offer you a version of that thread tonight. Somewhere, in this exact moment, someone else is sitting in a room very much like yours, carrying a version of the same low hum you've been carrying. Somewhere, someone else's shoulders are heavy, in exactly the way yours are heavy right now. You have never met them, You may never meet them, but the thread runs between you all the same, the way it ran between Marcus in his tent and every person before or after him who has ever had to talk themselves gently back into their own life. This isn't meant to minimize what you're carrying by pointing out that others carry it too. That's a different, colder move, the kind of, well, other people have it worse logic that tends to shame rather than comfort. This is something else. It's the recognition that your exhaustion places you inside a very old, very large fellowship of tired, decent people who kept going anyway, not because they were exceptional, but because keeping going, imperfectly, is simply what humans have always done, generation after generation, back further than any of us can trace. You are not the first person to feel this particular flavor of quiet despair, and you will not be the last. That's not a small thing. That's the thread. It means the ache you're carrying tonight has been carried, in some form, by nearly every person who's ever lived long enough to face a hard season, including, especially, the ones history remembers as strong, as wise, as somehow above the ordinary difficulty of being human. Marcus was never above it. He was inside it, the same as you. And the thread that connected him to every soldier freezing in that same camp, every mother in Rome losing a child to the same plague that had taken his own children, every stranger he'd never meet across the empire he ruled. That thread is the same one connecting you to every person, right now, tonight, quietly getting through their own version of this hour. You don't have to do anything with this. You don't have to reach out or fix anything or perform connection you don't have the energy for. Just let the fact of the thread be a small, quiet company in the room with you. You are never quite as alone in this as the tiredness wanted you to believe. Let's rest here again, just for a moment, before we move into something more practical. Picture an old stone wall, the kind you might find at the edge of a field that's been farmed for generations. Waist high, made of hundreds of individual stones, none of them mortared together, just stacked, patient, load-bearing, simply by the way they lean on one another. Notice how no single stone in that wall is holding up the whole structure. Each one only holds the small portion of weight directly above it and passes the rest down and along, stone to stone, until the whole wall stands. Not because any one piece is strong enough alone, but because none of them were ever asked to be. You are not required to hold up the whole wall of your life by yourself tonight. You only have to be the one small stone you actually are, holding the small portion of weight that's actually yours, and letting the rest lean on whatever else is holding you. The people around you, the ground beneath you, the slow architecture of time itself, which has carried far heavier things than tonight. Breathe with that image for a moment. You are a stone in a very old wall. You were never meant to be the whole wall. Let the shoulders drop another small inch, if they have one to give. Let the jaw soften, if it's ready to. There's no rush here. We have all the time this clearing offers. When you're ready, no hurry at all. Let's talk about something practical, not a fix. Just a small, soft tool you can carry with you after tonight, for the next time the gray comes back. Everything we've spoken about so far has been about seeing differently, seeing your numbness as intelligence rather than failure, seeing your grief as connection rather than isolation, seeing the obstacle as a place to find the next small, decent step rather than a wall to be furious at. Seeing matters enormously, but sometimes, in the middle of a hard night, seeing alone isn't quite enough. You need something to actually do with your hands, or with your breath, or with the shape of your attention. Something small enough that it doesn't ask more of you than you have to give, but structured enough that it gives the mind somewhere to go, besides the same tight loop it's been circling. So I want to offer you something we call, here in this clearing, the stone ritual. It isn't ancient. Marcus never wrote these exact words down, but every piece of it is built from the architecture he left behind. The noticing, the naming, the setting down, the choosing. It asks nothing of your body, no stretching, no breathing exercises that feel like homework, no forcing yourself into calm you don't actually feel. It only asks 4 small, soft movements of attention, one after another, like stepping stones across a stream you don't have to rush across. The first stone is feel, not fix, not analyze, not even name yet. Just feel, honestly, without editing it into something more presentable. Where is the weight sitting tonight? Is it in the chest, a kind of pressure behind the ribs? Is it in the stomach, a low unsettled hum? Is it in the throat, that particular tightness that comes before tears, that may or may not actually arrive? You don't have to make the feeling smaller or bigger than it is. You don't have to justify why it's there or compare it to whether you have the right to feel it, given everything else going on in the world, given how much worse things could be. Comparison isn't part of this stone, just what is actually here in the body right now. Let yourself feel it fully for a few slow breaths without trying to change it yet. The second stone is name. Once you've felt it, give it a small, honest word, not a diagnosis, not a grand narrative about what it means for your whole life. Just a word, the way you'd label a jar before putting it on a shelf. Tired, sad, flat, overwhelmed, numb. Marcus did this constantly in his notebook, a kind of quiet inventory, naming the specific texture of what he was carrying instead of letting it stay a formless, undifferentiated weight. There's a strange relief in naming, even when the name is heavy. An unnamed feeling tends to expand to fill the whole room. A named feeling, even a difficult one, becomes a thing, smaller than the whole of you, sitting beside you rather than consuming you entirely. The third stone is breathe, not a technique, not a count of 4 in, 7 hold, 8 out, though you're welcome to use that if it helps you. Just this, one slow breath taken on purpose, with the specific intention of witnessing the name feeling rather than fighting it. As you breathe out, you might silently say something like, I see you. You're allowed to be here. This isn't about making the feeling leave on the exhale. That would just be another way of fighting it, dressed up as relaxation. It's about letting the breath be a kind of soft container, a way of saying to the feeling, there is room for you here. You don't have to hide, and you don't have to grow bigger to be noticed. I've noticed you. You can just be, for now. The fourth stone is choose. This is the only stone that asks anything of you at all, and even this one asks something very small. Having felt it, named it, and breathed with it, what is the one small, decent thing available to you in the next few minutes? Not the next month, not the whole rest of your life, just the next few minutes. Sometimes the choice is, close this video and go to sleep. Sometimes it's, drink a glass of water. Sometimes it's, send one honest text to someone who'd want to know you're having a hard night. Sometimes, and this is a real, valid choice, not a failure to choose something more ambitious. The answer is simply, keep sitting here a little longer, doing nothing at all, because that's what's actually available to you right now, and that's enough. Feel, name, breathe, choose. 4 small stones, laid one after another across whatever stream you're trying to cross tonight. I want to be honest with you about what this ritual is not. It's not a cure. It won't make the plague of modern life, the grief, the exhaustion, the circumstances outside your control, disappear. Marcus's inner citadel didn't make his losses stop hurting, and this small ritual won't make yours stop hurting either. What it offers instead is smaller and, I think, more honest. A way of meeting the hard feeling without adding a second layer of suffering on top of it. The layer that comes from fighting the feeling, denying it, or letting it swallow the whole of you because it never got witnessed in the first place. We sometimes describe this ritual to people in this community as setting a stone down on the floor for the night. You've been carrying something heavy, maybe for hours, maybe for years. The stone ritual doesn't ask you to carry it forever, and it doesn't pretend you can throw it away entirely either. It just asks, can you set it down gently for tonight? Can you let the floor hold it for a few hours so your own two hands can finally rest? You can pick it back up tomorrow if you need to. Most burdens, unfortunately, are still there in the morning, but you don't have to hold it through the night as well. That's not weakness. That's just how a person survives a long season, one stone set down at a time, one honest breath at a time, one small decent choice at a time, for as many nights as it takes. Let's walk through the stone ritual together now, slowly, so it has a chance to settle into you as something felt, not just something explained. There's no wrong way to do this. If your mind wanders, that's not a failure of the exercise. That's just what minds do, and we'll gently guide it back each time, the way you'd guide a boat back toward the bank without any frustration at the current for pulling it off course. Let your eyes soften, or close, if that feels safe to you right now. If it doesn't, that's fine too. You can keep them open, resting on some middle distance in the room, unfocused, undemanding. Feel. Let your attention drop down out of your thinking mind and into your chest, your stomach, your throat. Don't reach for a word yet. Just notice where the weight of today, or this week, or this longer season has settled in the body. Maybe it's a tightness across the shoulders that's been there so long you'd almost stop noticing it. Maybe it's a hollow feeling, low in the stomach, the kind that shows up when something in life feels unfinished, or uncertain, or too heavy to look at directly. Maybe it's simply a flatness, not sharp pain, just a gray, low-hum absence of anything much at all. Whatever it is, however small or vague, let yourself feel it fully, without rushing to change it. You are allowed to just notice. Noticing is not the same as agreeing to suffer forever. It's just the first honest step. Take a moment here. There's no clock in this clearing. Name. Now, gently, see if a word wants to arrive. It doesn't have to be precise. It doesn't have to impress anyone, least of all yourself. Tired, heavy, flat, sad, overwhelmed, numb, scared. Whatever word comes, let it come, without editing it into something smaller or more acceptable. If more than one word arrives, that's all right too. You can hold 2 or 3, side by side, the way you'd hold several small stones in one open palm. Say the word to yourself now, quietly, even just in your mind. This is. Let it be true. Let it be witnessed, maybe for the first time today. Breathe. Take one slow breath in, filling the lower belly first, then the chest. Hold it, just briefly, at the top, not forcing anything, just pausing. And as you let it go, let the breath carry a small, silent message to whatever you named a moment ago. I see you. You're allowed to be here tonight. If it helps, place a hand gently over your chest or stomach as you do this, not as a performance of self-care, just as a small physical way of saying, I'm here, to the part of you that's been carrying the weight alone. There's nothing to force, The breath doesn't need to fix anything. It only needs to witness. Take one more breath, if you'd like. Let it be slower than the ones before it. Choose. And now, the smallest, gentlest question of the four. Given everything you've just felt and named and breathed with, what is one small, decent thing available to you in the next few minutes? Not the next month. Not the whole shape of your life. Just the next few minutes. Maybe it's finishing this video and then closing your eyes. Maybe it's drinking a glass of water before bed. Maybe it's simply staying exactly where you are, doing nothing further, letting stillness itself be the choice. There is no wrong answer here, as long as the answer comes from decency toward yourself, rather than another demand piled onto an already tired day. Whatever you've chosen, let it be enough. You don't need a bigger plan tonight. You don't need to have solved the whole season you're in. You just needed one small stone, set down carefully, in the right order, felt, named, breathed with, and met with one small act of decency. This is the whole of the practice. It will not feel dramatic. It's not supposed to. Marcus's own notebook wasn't dramatic either, just a tired, decent man, returning again and again to the same small, quiet questions, until the questions themselves became a kind of home he could return to, no matter how far the day had carried him from it. You now carry a version of that home with you. Feel, name, breathe, choose. 4 small stones. You can use them tonight. You can use them next week, next month, on whatever future night the gray decides to return, because it likely will. Not because you failed to fix yourself, but because that's simply the rhythm of a life, large enough to include real love and real loss both. The tide will ebb again sometime, and now you have 4 stones to stand on when it does. Let's rest again, just for a few breaths, before we go further into the night. Picture a lantern, small and warm, set on a windowsill in a house at the edge of a dark field. It isn't a large light. It doesn't illuminate the whole field, or push back the darkness for miles around. It only holds a small, steady circle of gold around itself, enough to see the windowsill, enough to see a hand resting near the glass, enough to say, quietly, to anyone passing in the dark, someone is home here. Someone is still tending the light. You don't have to be a lighthouse tonight. You don't have to illuminate anything beyond your own small windowsill. Just the fact that the lantern is lit at all, that some part of you, however tired, chose to keep a small flame going through a long dark stretch, is enough. It was always going to be enough. Let yourself be the small lantern for a moment, not the whole night sky, not the sun that has to rise on schedule for everyone else. Just a small, steady, honest light, tended quietly, asking nothing of anyone passing by except to notice, if they need to, that someone is still here. Rest in that image a moment longer. There's nowhere else to be right now. When you're ready, let's speak once more of the old man in the tent, not his losses this time, but the particular, quiet way he made peace with his own ending, and what that peace might offer someone who is only trying to make it through one more ordinary, difficult night. There's an idea running underneath almost every page of Marcus's notebook, one that modern readers sometimes find unsettling at first, until they sit with it long enough to feel its actual shape. He returns, again and again, to the fact of his own death, not in a fearful way, not as a source of dread hanging over each entry. He returns to it, the way you might return to touch a familiar stone in your pocket, a small, steady reminder, worn smooth by handling, that this life, exactly as it is, will not last forever. The old Latin phrase for this practice, one that predates Marcus, and that Roman generals were said to have whispered to themselves, even in their moments of greatest triumph, translates roughly to remember that you will die. It sounds grim, stripped of context. Said aloud in a modern room, it can land like a threat. But that is not how Marcus used it, and I don't think that's the gift it's meant to offer you either. Picture him again in that tent, the candle burned low, the notebook nearly full for the night. He writes, in one of his most quoted passages, something like this, in his own honest paraphrase: "You could leave this life right now. Let that determine what you do, and say, and think. I want to slow down on this, because I think it's the single most misunderstood teaching in the whole of Stoic philosophy, and also, potentially, one of the gentlest gifts available to someone carrying quiet despair tonight." He isn't saying this to frighten himself into productivity. A word, incidentally, that would have meant almost nothing to him, the way it means something to us now, in our era of quotas and metrics and endless self-optimization. He isn't saying, hurry up and accomplish more before it's too late. He's saying something much softer, much more like a permission slip than a warning. If this could be your last night, not because something terrible is imminent, but simply because none of us actually know how many nights we have, then what does that mean for how harshly you're allowed to judge yourself right now? What does it mean for how much energy is worth spending on guilt over the things you didn't get to today? What does it mean for how urgently you need to solve your entire life's trajectory before you're permitted to rest? Marcus used the fact of his mortality not as a whip, but as a strange, quiet kind of relief. If everything ends eventually, the empire, the plague, the grief, the long nights of feeling flat and numb and unsure of the point of it all, then nothing you're carrying right now is actually permanent, including the carrying itself. The despair that feels endless at 11 at night is, itself, subject to the same impermanence as everything else. It, too, will not last forever, not because you'll fix it through sheer effort, but because nothing, in the honest architecture of a human life, actually stays the same for long. Seasons turn. Even winter soil eventually, in its own unhurried time, grows warm again. There's a second layer to this practice, one that Marcus returns to just as often, and I think it might be the more tender of the two. If this life is finite, if there is, somewhere ahead, an actual last night, whenever it comes, then what actually matters, stripped down to its truest, smallest shape. Not the achievements, not the titles, though he had more of those than almost anyone in his world. Not even the philosophy itself, in some abstract academic sense. What mattered to him in the end, by his own repeated insistence across a decade of private writing, was simply whether he had been decent, whether he had met the people in his life, his soldiers, his advisors, even the ones who frustrated or betrayed him, with something closer to patience than cruelty, whether he had done the small, unglamorous work of being a good man inside an impossibly demanding role, on the days when no one but himself would ever know whether he'd chosen kindness or convenience. That's the whole of it in the end. Not conquest, not legacy, in the grand historical sense he probably assumed, correctly, that he'd receive regardless. Just decency, practiced quietly, day after day, in a life that was going to end eventually, no matter how well he ruled it. I want to offer this to you gently, because I think quiet despair often carries with it an exhausting, unspoken pressure. The sense that if you're going to keep going, you'd better be building towards something, achieving something, proving that the difficulty was worth it, by producing some visible, measurable result on the other side. Marcus's candlelit honesty offers something quieter than that, something that asks far less of you. You don't have to build anything tonight. You don't have to prove the difficulty was worth it by some external measure. You only have to be, as fully as you can manage, decent to yourself first, and then, when you have anything left over, to whoever else is near you. That's a soft duty, not a demand. Marcus never wrote these entries as commands barked at a soldier. He wrote them the way you'd speak to someone you loved very much, who was having a hard week, with patience, with repetition, with the understanding that some lessons have to be offered gently, more than once, before they finally take root. If tonight is one of the nights where all you can manage is decency toward yourself, resting instead of pushing, forgiving yourself for the flatness instead of interrogating it, choosing gentleness over the old familiar voice that says you should be doing more, that is enough. That was always the whole of what Marcus was reaching for, too. Underneath the armor, underneath the empire, underneath 2,000 years of history, flattening him into a marble statue, instead of remembering him as what he actually was, a tired man with a candle, doing his quiet best. He didn't know, writing those pages, that anyone would ever read them. He wasn't performing wisdom for an audience of history. He was simply talking himself, one more time, gently, back into caring about his own life, on a night when caring didn't come easily. If that's where you are tonight, you are in very old, very good company. I want to talk now about what all of this might actually look like tomorrow morning. Not in some sweeping, transformed way, not as a promise that you'll wake up and suddenly feel light again, but in the small, textured, ordinary way that a life actually gets lived, one unremarkable hour at a time. Marcus never described his philosophy as a system for feeling good. That distinction matters more than it might seem to at first. He wasn't chasing a mood. He was chasing something he called, across many entries, a kind of alignment, a state where his outer actions and his inner sense of decency were no longer working against each other, no longer requiring him to perform one thing while feeling another underneath. Think about how much quiet exhaustion comes, specifically from misalignment, the performing of fine when you are not fine, the showing up bright and capable in rooms while something underneath sits flat and gray and unseen, the gap between the self you present and the self you actually are, held open hour after hour, day after day, until the sheer effort of maintaining that gap becomes its own separate exhaustion, layered on top of whatever you were already carrying. Marcus's whole practice, the citadel, the view from above, the obstacle, the thread connecting him to everyone else's suffering, the honest reckoning with his own mortality, all of it in the end was in service of closing that gap, not by performing less competently in the world. He remained, by every historical account, a diligent, careful, deeply committed emperor, right up until his final illness. But internally, he was working, night after night, to make sure the performance and the person underneath it were speaking the same language, wanting the same things, aligned, rather than at war. This is what I mean by soft duty, and I want to distinguish it carefully from the harder, more familiar idea of discipline that our culture usually reaches for. The version of discipline most of us have absorbed is transactional and a little cold. Push through the resistance, override the tiredness, force the body and mind into compliance with a plan decided in advance, regardless of what's actually true underneath. That version treats the self as an obstacle to be managed, a machine to be optimized, a resource to be extracted from. Soft duty is a different architecture entirely. It doesn't ask you to override what's true. It asks you to include what's true and then choose the next decent action anyway, not by force, but by alignment. If you're tired, soft duty doesn't demand you pretend otherwise. It simply asks, given that you are tired, what is the smallest act of decency still available to you? Sometimes that answer is doing the difficult task anyway, because doing it aligns with a value you hold, even through the tiredness. And sometimes, just as validly, the answer is resting, because rest itself is the decent, aligned choice for a body and mind that have been asked to carry too much for too long. Neither answer is more virtuous than the other. This is important because a lot of the guilt underneath quiet despair comes from a quiet, persistent belief that rest is the lesser choice, the one you settle for when you can't manage the real work of pushing through. Marcus never framed it that way. His notebook is full of entries reminding himself, plainly, that rest was part of the design, not a deviation from it. He respected his own limits the way he respected the limits of a soldier, or a horse, or any living thing asked to carry weight across difficult terrain. Not as weakness to be shamed, but as fact to be honored, so that the carrying could continue sustainably, season after season, rather than collapsing under a demand for constant, unbroken output. I think this is the deepest gift buried in his notebook, more than any single technique or reframe. The modeling of a life where self-respect isn't measured by how much you can force yourself through, but by how honestly you can align your actions with what's actually true and actually decent, moment to moment, even when what's true is I have very little left to give today. So here is what alignment might look like tomorrow, in small, unremarkable terms. It might look like telling one person the truth about how tired you actually are, instead of the practiced "I'm fine" that costs more energy to maintain than the truth ever would. It might look like canceling one thing you don't have the capacity for, without a paragraph of justification attached, trusting that "I don't have it in me right now" is a complete and decent sentence on its own. It might look like doing the dishes not because a productive person would do the dishes, but because a small, clean kitchen is a kind of soft container for tomorrow's version of you, a quiet gift left behind for someone you love who happens to be yourself 12 hours from now. None of this requires the flat, gray feeling to lift first. That's the part worth sitting with. You don't have to wait until you feel motivated or inspired or back to your old self before you're allowed to take small, aligned action. The alignment doesn't depend on the mood. It only depends on the honest question, asked gently, again and again, the way Marcus asked it in his notebook for over a decade, without ever fully arriving. Given what's actually true right now, what is the next decent, aligned thing available to me? Sometimes that question will lead you toward more rest. Sometimes it will lead you, gently, back into the world. One small conversation, one small task, one small act of reaching out. Both are the practice. Neither is a failure of the other. I want to say one more thing about this, because I think it's easy, hearing all of this, to worry that soft duty is simply a permissive way of saying, do whatever you feel like, and call it aligned. That's not quite it either. Alignment, in Marcus's sense, still asks something of you. It still asks for honesty, for decency, for a kind of quiet integrity that doesn't let you off the hook entirely. It just refuses to demand that integrity through force, through shame, through the old, harsh architecture of push harder, no matter the cost. It asks you to be honest first, and then decent, in whatever way honesty actually allows on any given day. Some days, aligned decency will look like showing up fully for people who need you. Other days, It will look like the quietest, smallest act of self-respect. Closing the laptop, turning off the light, letting the day end without demanding one more thing of a body and mind that have already given what they had. Both are the same practice. Both are what Marcus was reaching for, night after night, in that tent, by candlelight, 2,000 years before you or I ever heard his name. Let's rest once more, here at the edge of the clearing, before we move toward the close of tonight. Picture the river again, the slow one, the one from earlier, moving through low hills and fading light. Notice how much further along it is now than when we first stood beside it. The water hasn't stopped, and it never needed you to push it. It has simply kept moving, patient and unhurried, exactly the way it was always going to. Let any thought that's arisen since we last stood here, anything about tomorrow, anything about the version of yourself you're worried you should be by now, set it gently onto one more small boat and let the current take it. You are still the bank, steady, unmoved by the current, even as it moves everything else past you. The water doesn't ask the bank to keep pace with it. The bank's whole purpose is simply to remain solid and quiet, holding the shape of the whole river without ever needing to become the water itself. Notice, too, the sky above the river, if you can picture it. The particular deep blue of early evening, turning toward dark. The first faint stars beginning to show themselves, unhurried, the way stars always arrive, never early, never late, simply present the moment the sky grows dark enough to reveal them. You don't have to be a star tonight, blazing and visible from far away. You're allowed to simply be present, the way the stars are present, whether or not anyone below happens to be looking up. Rest here a moment longer. The river keeps moving. The stars keep arriving, one by one, in their own unhurried time. And you, on the bank, are allowed to simply watch, without needing to do anything else at all. When you're ready, let's speak of the very end of Marcus's story, not as a sad ending, but as the quiet, gentle close of a long, difficult, deeply human life, and what it might offer someone standing, right now, at the edge of their own hard season. In the year 180, Marcus Aurelius died in a military camp, likely near the Danube frontier, still at war, still doing the work he had been doing for nearly 2 decades, holding together an empire that never quite stopped asking more of him than any one man should reasonably have to give. He was 58 years old. By the standards of his era, that was not a young death, but it was not an old one either. He had been ill, historians believe, for some time before the end. The details are murky, filtered through centuries of second-hand accounts, but the picture that emerges is of a man who, even in his final days, was still surrounded by soldiers, still managing the business of empire, still, in whatever quiet moments he could find, likely reaching for that same small notebook, or at least the habits of mind it had built in him over the decades. There's something worth sitting with in the fact that he died the way he lived, not in some grand cinematic final act, but in the middle of ordinary, exhausting, unglamorous duty, far from the comforts of Rome, surrounded by the same cold and mud and difficulty that had defined so much of his adult life. He didn't get the peaceful retirement his philosophy might have earned him in a fairer world. He got one more hard season, and then the end of the story, the way most human stories actually end, not with resolution, but simply with a final page, arriving whenever it arrives, in the middle of a life still being lived as fully as circumstances allowed. I don't tell you this to make the ending heavier than it needs to be. I tell you this because I think it matters that Marcus's peace, The peace we've spent this whole video trying to understand was never a peace that depended on his circumstances finally becoming easy. He never got the easy version of life. The plague didn't relent. The wars didn't stop. The grief of all those children never fully healed, not in any way the record shows us. And still, by every account we have, he remained, until the very end, a man who was trying, as best he could, to be decent to his soldiers, to his family, to the empire he never asked to inherit, and, in the quiet privacy of that notebook, to himself. That's the whole of what he leaves behind when you strip away the marble statues and the history book language of philosopher-emperor. Not a man who solved suffering, a man who stayed in relationship with it, gently, for as long as he had breath to do so. Here's the detail I find most tender, and I want to offer it to you as we near the close of tonight. Marcus never intended for anyone to read his notebook. Historians believe it was likely discovered among his private papers after his death, and only survived through centuries of copying, near loss, and quiet transmission from one set of hands to another, by a kind of historical accident, a thread of chance that could easily have broken at any point along the way, and left us with nothing at all. For most of history since, we've had no guarantee that this particular voice, this particular record of one tired, decent man talking himself gently back into his own life, would survive to reach us. And yet it did, across nearly 2,000 years, through the fall of the empire he ruled, through wars and fires, and the slow erosion of nearly everything else from his era. This one small, private, unglamorous record of a man's honest struggle to keep going survived, not because he built it to last, not because he was trying to leave a legacy, but simply because it was true and honest and human enough that whoever copied it down through the centuries recognized something in it worth preserving. I think there's a quiet message buried in that survival, one that has nothing to do with philosophy and everything to do with what actually endures. Marcus never knew, writing those pages by candlelight in a cold tent, that any of it would outlast him. He wasn't performing for history. He was just trying to get through one more difficult night, the same as you are tonight. And it turned out that the getting through, the honest, unglamorous, private work of staying in relationship with his own difficulty, was itself the thing worth carrying forward, worth copying by hand, worth protecting across centuries of loss. You don't know, right now, what parts of your own quiet, unglamorous getting through might matter to someone else eventually, a version of yourself years from now, who needed to know it was possible to survive a season like this one, or someone in your life who is watching, even if you don't realize it, how you handle a hard year, and learning from it more than either of you might guess. You're not writing a notebook for history. Neither was Marcus when he started. He was just trying to make it to morning. That turned out to be enough. It usually is. I want to close with an idea that ties everything we've spoken about tonight into a single, small, carryable shape. Something you can hold on to after this video ends, after the lamp is off, after the ordinary demands of tomorrow have started asking for your attention again. There's a particular kind of growth that happens without anyone watching, without any visible sign that it's occurring at all. Think again of that winter soil we spoke of near the beginning. How nothing about its surface suggests that anything meaningful is happening beneath it, and yet the roots are still there, still held, still quietly preparing for a spring that will eventually, in its own unhurried time, arrive. No one applauds soil in December for doing its job well. No one measures its progress or asks it to justify the pace of its own repair. It is simply trusted by the whole architecture of the natural world around it, to be doing exactly what it needs to be doing, exactly when it needs to be doing it, without an audience, without a report, without proof. I want to offer you that same trust tonight, for whatever season you're actually in. There is a kind of work that happens in rest, real work, even though it produces nothing visible, even though it would show up as an empty box on any list of accomplishments you might keep. The nervous system recalibrating, the heart processing grief at whatever pace grief actually moves, which is almost never the pace we choose for it. The mind, in sleep, quietly sorting and filing and making sense of things the waking hours didn't have room to handle. None of this shows up as a finished task. None of it earns a mark on a calendar. And all of it is real, necessary, load-bearing work, happening whether or not anyone, including you, is watching it happen. We call this, here in this clearing, the secret work. Not secret in the sense of hidden from you, exactly. You may feel its effects, distantly, the way you feel warmth from a fire in another room, but secret in the sense that it doesn't announce itself, doesn't ask for credit, doesn't require your conscious effort or your careful management in order to proceed. It happens in the background, the way roots grow in the dark, the way a bruise heals under skin that shows nothing but a fading, quiet color for days before returning, one morning, to looking simply like skin again. If you've been hard on yourself for not having done enough during this hard season, for not journaling every day, for not turning your grief into growth on any visible timeline, for simply surviving a stretch of time without producing anything you could point to and call progress, I want to offer you the possibility that you have, in fact, been doing an enormous amount of work all along, just not the kind that shows. Marcus trusted this, in his own way, more than the historical record usually gives him credit for. His notebook is full of entries where nothing dramatic happens. No breakthrough, no sudden clarity, just the same tired man, returning to the same handful of quiet questions, night after night, for years, trusting that the returning itself was doing something, even when he couldn't point to concrete evidence of change from one entry to the next. That's the invitation I want to leave you with tonight. Not a demand to go do more, not a checklist of Stoic practices to master before you're allowed to call yourself recovered. Just this: trust the secret work. Trust that setting the stone down for the night, resting in the small circle of your own quiet lantern light, letting the winter soil of your inner landscape stay still for as long as it needs to. Trust that all of this is not a pause in your life, waiting for the real living to resume once you feel better. It is the living. It is, in its own quiet, unglamorous way, the whole of the work, happening exactly as it should, at exactly the pace it needs to happen, whether or not you can see it moving. You have done enough today. You have done enough this week, this month, this whole difficult season, even on the days that felt like nothing at all happened. Let the night do its work now, in secret, the way it always has, the way it did for a tired emperor in a cold tent 2,000 years ago, and the way it will keep doing for every tired, decent person who ever needed permission to simply rest and trust that the resting was, itself, enough. One more pause before we begin to close. Picture the fire we mentioned at the very start of this video, the one already lit in this clearing, waiting for you before you'd even arrived. Look at it now, if you can hold the image gently in your mind. Notice how it doesn't roar or demand attention. It simply burns, low and steady, the kind of fire that's been tended quietly for hours, the kind that will still be there, faithfully, small and warm, long after everyone else in the story has gone quiet for the night. You don't have to feed this fire anything right now. You don't have to perform gratitude for it or prove you deserve its warmth. It's simply here, the way it was always going to be here, for as long as you need it. Feel the edges of your body again, the chair or the bed beneath you, the air against your skin, the quiet weight of your own breathing. You've carried a great deal tonight, even in stillness, grief and history, and the slow architecture of an old philosophy built by tired, decent people trying to survive their own difficult centuries. You don't have to hold on to any of it too tightly. Let it settle, the way ash settles at the bottom of a fire that's already done its warming for the evening. We're near the end of this clearing now, not because there's nothing more to say. There's always more to say, always more of the old notebook left unread, always more seasons ahead that will ask something of you. But because tonight, this particular gathering, by this particular fire, has done what it came to do, you arrive tired. You're allowed to leave, if not lighter, then at least a little less alone in the carrying. Let's close together, gently, the way Marcus closed so many of his own nights. Not with triumph, not with resolution, just with one more honest, quiet return to the questions that matter. Before we part for tonight, I want to gather up everything we've walked through, gently, the way you'd gather a few small stones into a pocket before leaving a beach, not to carry the whole shore with you, just enough to remember it by. We began by simply landing in your body, the weight of your shoulders, the temperature of the room, the reminder that you weren't here to perform learning, only to arrive. That's worth returning to any time the noise gets loud again. You can land, right where you are, in less than a minute, anytime you need to. We spoke of your numbness not as a broken part of you, but as a kind of biological intelligence. Winter soil, a tripped circuit breaker, the natural ebb of a tide that was never meant to stay at flood all the time. If the flat, gray feeling returns, you don't have to treat it as evidence that something has gone wrong with you. You can treat it as a signal, worth listening to with curiosity rather than shame. We met Marcus Aurelius, not as a marble statue of ancient wisdom, but as a tired, grieving man who wrote to himself, in private, for no audience at all, because he needed, again and again, to remind himself that he was worth more than what he produced in a day. If you felt that pressure, the sense that your worth recalculates each evening based on an invisible ledger of tasks, you now know that even an emperor needed the same reminder more than once across more than a decade of honest, unfinished pages. We spoke of the Inner Citadel, the small, sovereign room inside you that no circumstance can enter without your permission, the one place where you always get to decide, regardless of what's happening around you, whether you'll meet the day with decency toward yourself. You can return to that room anytime you've lost the door. Finding your way back is not a failure of the practice. Finding your way back is the practice. We rose together in imagination to the view from above, the widening perspective that doesn't shrink your pain, but makes room around it. The reminder that you are one small, real, tender point of light among countless others, never as isolated as the tightness of a hard night likes to convince you that you are. We spoke of the obstacle that can become the way, not a demand to turn every hardship into triumph, but a small, quiet question you can ask yourself whenever the world refuses to cooperate with your plans. Given that this is where I am, what is the next small, decent thing available to me? Sometimes that answer is action. Sometimes just as validly, that answer is rest. We spoke of Sympathia, the old Stoic idea of the thread connecting all things, the reminder that somewhere, tonight, someone else is carrying a version of your exact tiredness, and that this doesn't diminish your pain, it simply keeps you company inside it. We built, together, the stone ritual: feel, name, breathe, choose. 4 small soft stepping stones you can use anytime the gray returns, requiring nothing from your body, only a gentle willingness to witness what's actually true. Name it honestly, breathe with it kindly, and choose the next small decent thing from wherever you actually are, rather than from where you wish you were standing instead. We spoke of the old man and the candle, and the strange, gentle relief buried inside the practice of remembering our own mortality, not as a threat, but as a permission slip, a reminder that nothing you're carrying, including the carrying itself, is actually permanent, and that what matters most, in the end, was never achievement, only decency, practiced quietly, one ordinary day at a time. We spoke of alignment and soft duty, the difference between forcing yourself through a life that doesn't match what's true underneath, and gently closing that gap instead, letting your outer actions and your inner honesty finally speak the same quiet language. Whether that language says keep going or rest now, both being equally valid answers on any given day. And we spoke finally of the secret work, the trust that rest itself is not a pause in your life, waiting for the real living to resume, but a real and necessary part of the living itself, happening in the dark, without an audience, without needing your management or your proof, the way roots grow beneath winter soil, the way a bruise fades beneath skin that shows nothing for days, before quietly, one morning, simply looking like skin again. You don't have to remember all of this perfectly. You don't have to walk away from tonight having mastered anything. If all you carry forward is one small stone, feel, name, breathe, choose, that is more than enough. Marcus himself, across a decade of writing, never mastered any of this either. He simply kept returning. That's the whole of the practice, and it's available to you tonight, tomorrow, and on whatever future night the tide happens to pull back out again. I want to close, before the final invitation, with something a little different, a kind of letter, written the way Marcus might have written to himself, if he'd had the chance to write, not just to his own tired heart, but to a stranger, centuries away, sitting in a room he could never have imagined, carrying a weight he never got to hear the details of, but would have recognized instantly all the same. To whoever is listening tonight, I don't know your name or your circumstances, or the particular shape of the weight you carried into this clearing. I only know because I carried something like it myself, in a cold tent, at the edge of an empire that never once stopped asking things of me, that the weight is real, and that you are not wrong to feel it, and that nothing about feeling it makes you weak, or broken, or behind in some race no one ever actually agreed to run. I want you to know that I did not solve this. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think too many people who came after me turned my private, unfinished struggle into something tidier than it actually was. A formula, a system, a set of rules that promised, if followed correctly, to make the difficulty disappear. It didn't disappear for me. Not the grief, not the exhaustion, not the long nights where I couldn't make myself care about the empire or the war, or even, some nights, my own life. I simply kept returning to the same handful of quiet questions, night after night, for years, because returning was the only thing available to me that felt honest. If you take nothing else from tonight, take this. You do not have to solve your own difficulty in order to deserve rest from it tonight. You do not have to have your whole life figured out by morning. You only have to do what I did, which was smaller than anyone ever gives me credit for. Feel what was true, name it honestly, breathe with it gently, and choose the next small, decent thing available, over and over, for as many nights as it took. It took me most of my life. I never fully arrived. I want you to know that, because I think it might be the most comforting thing I have to offer you. Not a destination, but the permission to keep walking without one, trusting that the walking itself, done with as much decency as you can manage on any given day, was always the actual point. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to feel flat and numb and unsure of what any of it is for, on some nights and not others, for reasons you may never fully understand. None of that disqualifies you from a good life. I promise you that from the far side of a life that included more grief than I would have chosen and more difficulty than I ever fully made peace with, it was still, by any honest measure, a life worth having lived. Not because it was easy, because I kept choosing decency inside it, even on the nights when nothing else about it felt like enough. Rest now, if you need to. The empire will still be there in the morning, whatever form your empire happens to take. The job, the family, the long list of undone things. It will wait. It has waited on harder nights than this one, for people far more essential to it than either of us ever were. You are allowed to set it down, just for tonight, and let the winter soil of your own inner landscape stay quiet and still, exactly as long as it needs to. I never met you. I never will. But the thread runs between us all the same one that ran between me and every soldier freezing in that same camp, every mother in Rome who lost a child to the same plague that took my own, every stranger across the empire I ruled and never personally knew. You are part of that thread now too, whether you ask to be or not. That is not a burden. That is, I think, the closest thing to company that a life like ours can actually offer. The knowledge that we were never quite as alone in the caring as the tiredness liked to convince us we were. Rest well, return tomorrow, or don't. The choice is yours, and either one is allowed. I only wanted you to know before you go that the difficulty you're carrying does not disqualify you from anything. It only means you're human, walking the same worn path I walked, by candlelight, in a cold tent, a very long time ago, still, somehow, finding my way back to caring about my own small, tired, decent life, one quiet page at a time. Good night. I don't know exactly what Marcus would have said, of course. No one does. But everything in that letter is built from the honest architecture of what he actually left behind. The grief he never hid, the exhaustion he never dressed up as strength, the returning again and again to the same small questions without ever needing to arrive at a final answer in order to call the practice worthwhile. If any part of that letter landed somewhere true in you tonight, I want you to know that it was always meant for you specifically, not in some mystical sense, but in the very ordinary sense, that this is what these old words have always been for. Not a museum piece, not a dusty philosophy to be studied at a distance, a companion passed hand to hand across centuries, precisely because it was honest enough and tired enough and human enough to still make sense to someone lying awake tonight in a world Marcus could never have imagined, carrying a weight he would have recognized instantly all the same. There's one more figure from Marcus's life worth sitting with before we close, because I think he offers something none of the philosophy alone can quite provide, a living example, witnessed up close over decades, of what a decent, steady life actually looks like, day to day, without any of the drama we usually attach to wisdom. His name was Antoninus Pius, and he was Marcus's adoptive father, the emperor who ruled before him, who raised him from adolescence, and who Marcus watched closely and admiringly for the better part of 23 years, long before he ever had to carry the weight of the role himself. In one of the most tender passages in the whole of his private notebook, Marcus doesn't write about grand philosophical victories when he describes this man. He writes about small, ordinary things, how Antoninus was patient with people who disagreed with him, how he didn't need constant praise or public recognition to feel steady in his own decisions, how he kept the same modest habits, whether he was being watched by the whole of Rome or completely alone, how he could work through a difficult problem without rushing, without irritability, without letting the pressure of the moment curdle into cruelty toward the people around him. None of this sounds remarkable on its own. That's precisely the point Marcus seems to be making, again and again, in the way he chooses to remember this man. Antoninus wasn't a legendary warrior. He wasn't famous for conquest or oratory or any of the dramatic qualities history usually rewards with a statue. He was famous, in Marcus's quiet recollection, for something much smaller and much harder to sustain, an unshowy, unglamorous consistency, a steadiness that didn't depend on the day going well. I think this matters enormously for anyone in the middle of quiet despair, because so much of our cultural imagination around healing, around getting better, around becoming okay again, is built on the model of the dramatic turning point, the breakthrough, the transformation, the before and after. Marcus's most formative teacher offered him something else entirely: proof, witnessed daily for over 2 decades, that a decent life is mostly made of small, repeated, undramatic choices, made quietly, without an audience, without needing to be extraordinary in order to matter. Watching that kind of steadiness up close for that long seems to have shaped Marcus's own private practice more than any single philosophical text he studied, when he writes, late in his life, about wanting to meet each day with patience rather than irritability, with modesty rather than performance, with the same unhurried steadiness whether anyone was watching or not. He is, in a very real sense, still trying to become the man he watched his adoptive father quietly be. For all those years, without ever making a show of it. I want to offer you this model gently, because I think it might be more useful on a hard night than the grander image of Marcus the philosopher emperor that history usually hands us. You don't need a breakthrough tonight. You don't need a dramatic before and after to prove that something meaningful happened here. You only need what Antoninus offered and what Marcus spent a lifetime trying to inherit: the willingness to keep choosing steadiness and decency in small, unremarkable moments, over and over, without needing anyone to witness it, without needing it to look impressive from the outside. That's a quiet, achievable kind of hope, I think. More achievable than the version that demands transformation on a deadline. You don't have to become a different person by morning. You only have to be, in whatever small way is available to you, a little more like the steady, patient people who modeled decency for you once, long ago, the way Antoninus modeled it for a grieving, tired young man who would go on to become one of history's most quietly honest emperors, one unremarkable, undramatic day at a time. If you had someone like that in your own life, a parent, a teacher, a friend, anyone who showed you, simply by their steady presence, that decency didn't require drama to be real, let yourself think of them for a moment now. You don't have to tell them. You don't have to do anything with the memory at all. Just let it sit beside you for a moment, the way Marcus let the memory of his adoptive father sit beside him, decades later, still steadying him on the hardest nights of a life that never stopped asking difficult things of him. And if you didn't have someone like that, if steadiness wasn't modeled for you the way it was for Marcus, I want you to know that you can still become that kind of quiet, steady presence for yourself first, and eventually, if you choose, for someone else who needs it later. You don't need permission from history to start. You only need the same small, repeated, undramatic choices that Antoninus made, and that Marcus spent his whole life trying to inherit. Patience over irritability, modesty over performance, steadiness over spectacle, one ordinary day at a time. One last small pause before the final words of tonight. Picture morning, arriving on the far side of whatever rest you get tonight. Not a dramatic sunrise, nothing cinematic, just the ordinary, gray then gold light that comes through a window on any given day. Notice how it doesn't rush. Notice how it doesn't ask the room to be ready for it. It simply arrives, gradually, the way it always has, whether or not you were watching for it. You don't have to greet that morning with any particular feeling. You don't have to wake up transformed or lighter or certain that today will be easier than yesterday was. You're only asked to let the light arrive, the way it always does, and to meet it with whatever is actually true for you in that moment. Nothing performed, nothing forced. Let yourself imagine, just for a breath or two, waking into that ordinary light with a little more patience toward yourself than you had yesterday. Not because tonight fixed everything, just because something in this clearing, however small, offered a little more room to breathe than you had before you arrived. Hold that image gently. We'll carry it into the very last part of tonight together, a small companion practice for the mornings, to sit alongside the stone ritual we built for the nights. Everything we've built tonight has been, in some sense, an evening practice, a way of meeting the day's accumulated weight once it's already arrived, once the gray has already settled in. I want to leave you with one small counterpart to that, a companion practice for the mornings, because I think quiet despair often has as much to do with how a day begins as with how it ends. Marcus, in several of his most well-known entries, wrote to himself specifically about the difficulty of waking up, the pull towards staying under the blankets, the reluctance to face another day of demands that never seemed to lighten, no matter how faithfully he met them. He wasn't writing to shame himself out of the reluctance. He was writing to gently walk himself through it, the same unhurried way he walked himself through everything else. So here, briefly, is a morning counterpart to the stone ritual. Something soft enough to hold even on the mornings when getting up at all feels like the whole of what you have to offer. Before you rise, while you're still lying there, however heavy the pull to stay under the blankets might be, try offering yourself 3 small, honest sentences, the way Marcus offered them to himself, in one form or another, across countless mornings of his own. The first, I am allowed to begin slowly, not a demand to leap into productivity, not a demand to prove your worth before your feet even touch the floor, just a quiet permission to let the day begin at whatever pace your body and mind actually need this morning. The second, I don't have to feel ready in order to begin. Readiness, as much as we're taught to wait for it, rarely arrives before the beginning does. Marcus never waited to feel inspired before opening his notebook. He simply began, tired and uncertain, and let the beginning itself do the work that waiting never could. The third, whatever today asks of me, I will try to meet it with decency rather than force. Not perfection, not relentless output, just decency, toward yourself first, and toward whoever else you happen to meet along the way. 3 sentences, no physical effort required, no elaborate ritual, no specific number of minutes you have to spend on it, no risk of doing it wrong, just a small, soft alignment of intention, offered to yourself before the day, has a chance to hand you its first demand. You can pair this with the stone ritual from earlier. Feel, name, breathe, choose in the evening, when the day's weight has accumulated and needs to be witnessed and set down, and this small waking companion in the morning, when the day is still unwritten and needs, instead, a gentle, decent beginning rather than a forced one. Together, these are not a cure. I want to be honest about that one more time, because I think honesty has been the whole spirit of this video, and I don't want to abandon it here at the end. They are simply 2 small handholds, offered to you the way Marcus offered them to himself, across a long, difficult, deeply human life that never stopped asking things of him, and that he never stopped meeting, imperfectly, with as much decency as he had left, to give on any particular day. That was always enough for him, even on the days it didn't feel like it. I hope, in time, it becomes enough for you too. Before we part, I want to speak plainly, for a moment, the way you'd speak to someone you'd been sitting beside for a long while, both of you quiet, both of you a little more settled than when you first sat down. This channel exists for exactly this, for nights like tonight, for people carrying exactly the kind of quiet weight we've spent this whole video sitting with together. It isn't built around the idea that you need fixing, or optimizing, or push towards some faster version of healing than the one your own inner landscape is actually ready for. It's built around something slower, and I think more honest. The belief that recovery, whatever that word means for you, is mostly secret work, unglamorous, unhurried, happening mostly in the dark, mostly without an audience, mostly without proof that it's working. Until one day, quietly, you notice that some of the old weight has shifted without being able to point to the exact moment it happened. If tonight offered you even a small measure of company inside that secret work, I want to invite you back, not because this channel needs your attention, not because a subscription changes anything about the honesty of what's offered here, but because recovery of this kind tends to go better with company, and we meet here, quietly, every week, to keep tending this same fire together. There's no pressure in that invitation, no countdown, no urgency, none of the loud language that usually accompanies an invitation like this. Just a door, left open in case you want to return to this clearing the next time the gray comes back. And it likely will, not because you failed at anything, but because that's simply the rhythm of a life, large enough to include real love and real loss. Both. The same rhythm Marcus lived inside for nearly 6 decades, without ever fully escaping it, and without ever needing to. If you'd like to join us, the subscribe button is a small, quiet way of saying, I'll be back the next time I need this clearing. Nothing more dramatic than that. No performance required, no proof that tonight worked, or that you're better now, or that you've made any measurable progress at all. Just a way of keeping the door open between us for whenever you need it next. And if tonight is the only time our paths cross, that's all right too. I hope you carry the stones with you regardless. Feel, name, breathe, choose. I hope you remember, on the next hard night, that your numbness was never a moral failing, only a form of intelligence, doing exactly what it was built to do. I hope you remember the small, sovereign room inside you that no circumstance can enter without your permission, and that you find your way back to its door again and again for as many nights as it takes, the same way an old emperor did, imperfectly, honestly, for the whole of a difficult, decent life. Let the night do its work now, in secret, the way it always has. You don't have to supervise it. You don't have to prove anything to it, or to yourself, or to anyone else who might be watching, which is likely no one at all. And even if someone were watching, they would see exactly what I see. Offering this to you now, someone tired, doing their honest best, which was always, quietly, enough. You have done enough today. Let that be the last sentence you carry out of this clearing tonight. Not a plan, not a resolution, just a small, steady piece of permission, the kind Marcus kept having to give himself, over and over, across a decade of honest, unfinished pages. You have done enough. Rest now. The night will hold the rest. If you found even a small measure of company here tonight, consider staying a moment longer in the quiet before you go. Not to do anything further, just to let the stillness finish settling, the way a room stays warm for a while, after a fire has been banked low for the night. There's no rush to leave the clearing. It will still be here, exactly as it is, whenever you're ready. And if you're the kind of person who likes to mark these small moments of company somehow, a comment left in the quiet, a word or two about what tonight stirred in you, or simply the small, wordless act of pressing a button that says I was here, and this helped. Know that it's never required, and it's always welcome, the way a hand on a shoulder is welcome, without needing to be asked for. This clearing is built by the people who return to it, one quiet evening at a time, and if you're one of them now, we're glad, in the plainest and least dramatic way possible, that you found your way here. Wherever you go from this clearing, back into sleep, back into a difficult week, back into whatever ordinary demands are waiting for you on the other side of this video, I hope you carry a little more room to breathe than you had before you arrived. That was always the only real goal of tonight, not transformation, not a cure, just a little more room. Good night. We'll leave the fire lit, low and steady, for whenever you decide to return.